Well, hey everybody, no mai hara mai. Um, it's good to be with you in this digital age. Hey, I was gonna just jump in and say, I hope your bubble's good and I hope you're doing all right, but and then just launch into some content. But I guess for me, to pause and think that the nature of community and especially the church is to pause a moment and for us to think that everyone's last number of weeks has been very different, and to be mindful of that. So I'm sure, and I know for a bunch of you talking to you, some of it has been just such a beautiful experience where you've got to have this kind of forced quality time again with the people in your bubble, and that has been a good thing. Some of you have been in your gardens and done projects and found this awesome space and rhythm. For some of you that have got such demanding jobs and the responsibility's huge, I know that the relief from the phone ringing, even that cell phone being attached to your ear, and the relief of that has been good for your soul. So I know for me it's been this beautiful reconnection with quality time with my kids, and so there's been some great things. Also in the mix of it, for others it has been, I imagine, challenging. So for some of you hearing this beautiful space and rhythms, you're like, what? You know, you've been in the back room, huddled down somewhere, still working hard, and others of you essential workers have been, you know, doing it, getting out there, and even though it seems to be the curve is flattened and on the decline, you would have had to deal with the anxiety and the stress of if COVID had increased. And so you've had a different experience, and we thank you for doing that, and we're mindful of you. For others of you, you've had some great moments, but also some challenging ones where you couldn't physically go and see your sick parents, or where families and homes have actually been disconnected, and you haven't been able to see some of your own family. So we're mindful of you. And the beautiful thing about community and especially the church is that different pay brackets and different circumstances, we are aligned, and our common denominator is Jesus, the one that is with us. Christ, our constant companion, who knows the detail of every situation. So I just wanted to pause and say, Kelly and I, we think of you, we pray for you, and we're trusting that Jesus is with you. Hey, so this time has been obviously different to all of us, but it has been this opportunity to reset. And obviously there's some really good signs now that the restriction levels will drop, and we'll go into a new level potentially next week. And although the months coming are still a little bit unknown. And one of the things I've been thinking about the last few days, which I just want to offer to you and see if you resonate at all, is that we get to reconsider what our bubble will be exposed to. And some of that will be directed to us by the government, and you know, being able to potentially expose our bubble to some more family, or maybe schooling, or for work. And but much of what we expose our bubble to is still our choice. What I mean by bubble is, yes, our immediate bubble that we've been using, but our mind, our whānaus, our rhythms, we have a choice to decide what we will engage our bubble with. Because have you noticed that it will be so tempting, for some of us anyway, to just go back to normality? And I know the months will look really different, but the hustle, the pace, and I just wonder if, for myself, is, will I let my rhythms and my bubble be exposed to just the new things and just add stuff to it, or will I be mindful? Almost being like kind of minimalists, where we only, as we navigate this new terrain, allow in the essential things. the beautiful things, the beneficial things? Or will I just jump back on the rat race and fill it with many things? Because there is multiple suitors that are keen to get in on our bubble as we re-emerge. One little thought is in 1978, there were these two social scientists, Canadian, and they were doing an experiment, and they got a group of 4 and 5-year-old boys. And their experiment was this: they split them into 2 groups, and the first group, they had these boys watch 2 commercials advertising a toy. And the other group of boys, they didn't watch any commercial. And they gave all these boys a choice. They said, choice number 1 was this: you could go and play with a boy who's a nice boy, but he doesn't have the toy that you saw in the commercial. Or you could go and play with the boy that has the toy that you saw, but you need to know he's a mean boy, very mean boy. And what's interesting is the first group of boys made the choice. Apart from just 1 or 2 exceptions, almost all of them chose to play with the boy that had the toy, even though he was mean. Now, on top of that, the boys that had not seen the commercial chose to play with the boy that was nice. And what was fascinating for me is that this advertising had prompted the boys in the first group to choose the lower human condition instead of the superior one. And I found that really interesting, because as we kind of come out and re-emerge a little bit of what this new world will look like, we have a choice. We have this choice to see what we attach our bubble to. And again, maybe there's some wisdom in being kind of like minimalists and only allowing in the meaningful, because there's so many things, so many voices, so much social media, so many opportunities to expose our bubble to. So be precious with your bubble. Take it or leave it. Little thought I had. You know, of course, the Jesus story, our faith, speaks profoundly to this time. Jesus is still the compass, the center point of what it is to experience human flourishing in our own worlds and in society. So we look to him, we look to his teachings, we look to that ark. Jesus is the archetypal man to see where we flourish, to see where our bubbles will be best. So in this time, as we consider this, it's an interesting time in the liturgical calendar where Easter is kind of the poster boy, really. Christmas and Easter. You know, Easter gets a lot of attention. There's the grief, the journey, heading into the crucifixion, and then there's the resurrection, the ecstasy of that. But there's this interesting time between the resurrection and ascension that I just wanted to draw our attention to for a few minutes, which is such a fascinating time where Jesus appears to a bunch of the disciples, many people. It's this kind of liminal space, a space I'll call the time between resurrection and ascension. And I think we can discover some things about Jesus' character again and his intention in that time for those disciples and us as we lean in on that. It's a time, if you consider the disciples, and maybe as I just quickly go over some of the stories of his appearance, appearing to them, you could consider, where does it resonate for you right now? Which disciple do you go, yeah, man, that's me, or where you need Jesus to show up? It's an interesting time where he appears to disciples and to us. Let me read. And these disciples are trying to figure out, what does life look like now? You know, things have changed. The Messiah was maybe meant to take over Rome in a military kind of way, or We'd hoped he would do this differently, and they had to go back to work out similarly. What does work look like for us? What does life look like for us? Things are still somewhat normal. We eat and we need to work, but things have changed similar to us. Let me read from Acts. It says, Acts chapter 1. After the death, he presented himself alive to them, many different settings over a period of 40 days. In face-to-face meetings, he talked to them about the things concerning the kingdom of God. As they ate and met and ate meals together, he told them that they were on no account to leave Jerusalem, but must wait for the Father promised. What the Father promised, sorry. The promise you heard from me. John baptized in water, you will be baptized in the Holy Spirit. So, Jesus appeared to a bunch of people, and we gleaned some things about his character and intention in that time. Firstly, he appears, as we mentioned last weekend and the Easter story is known so well, to Mary. Mary, who is this faithful disciple who goes to the grave to grieve. And he appears to her as a gardener. Remember that? And she doesn't recognize him. She recognizes him only as a gardener until he calls her by name, Mary. He calls us by name. And suddenly she recognizes him. And what's super interesting is that Jesus appears to women, not only the first appearance, but the second appearance we'll see in a moment as well. And in a patriarchal society where women didn't even have legal status to be witness in court, Jesus, I think, makes a statement. He makes a statement to say, I'm with you, you are a priority. He seems to, not just in this instance, but always be elevating the human condition. Looking out for the most vulnerable. In that society, women and children were so at risk. They had such low mana in their society. And Jesus continues to elevate the human condition. You know, I would say he's always tilting the human condition and experience back to the original Eden intent. And he does this. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Notice that Jesus is so often about mana enhancing encounters, where it's not just a judgment of sin with people. He knows that sin is the thing that will be punished by, that dehumanizes us, but above that, he increases our mana. He shows us a new way, and he does this with Mary. So he then appears to some woman that had been in the second state, that had been with Mary in the garden. And just to really disrupt the male-dominated kind of narrative, he does this with women. And I want to read from you with Matthew 28, where he speaks to them. Going old school with a book. My charger on my computer just died yesterday, so I'm going old school and just doing a one take, no notes, Bible study. Okay, Tupai? Matthew 28. The woman, deep in wonder and full of joy, lost no time in leaving the tomb. They ran to tell the disciples. And then Jesus met them, stopping them in their tracks. Good morning, he said. They fell to their knees and embraced his feet and worshipped him. Jesus said, you're holding on to me for dear life. Don't be frightened like that. Go tell my brothers that they are going to go to Galilee, and I'll meet them there. So he meets a group of women, which is great. Later we find out in Luke, later that day, he meets Cleopas and another traveller. Some say it may be Cleopas's wife or another disciple. And the context of that is they'd just been in Jerusalem, just had been following Jesus, this rabbi, with all their hopes of Messiah, and they knew he was a prophet, and people were gleaning to his teachers, but he'd been murdered. And one of the texts in Luke says they had hoped he was a Messiah. But they're back on their way to Emmaus. Can you imagine? This is their hometown. They had left Emmaus with all their dreams to be follow this rabbi, this new way of life in Jerusalem. But now they are head down, grieving, puzzled, wondering what life will look like on the way back. And Jesus comes to them disguised as a traveler. And I won't go through the whole thing, but he appears to them and he kind of puts on a bit of an act. I love it, plays within our rules of what we're going through at times. And he says, what's going on? Why so down? And they, did you not know? Where have you been? Everyone knows in Jerusalem. They crucified him. They crucified Jesus. And Jesus kind of takes them through this epic Bible study of what did you think the Messiah would do? How do you think he would fulfill the prophetic kind of words on his life? And they're amazed at his teaching. And then Jesus kind of acts it, and the text says he kind of pretends to press on the journey, and they say, "Oh no! Stop! Would you eat with us? Stay with us." What's fascinating for me here? There's so many things in this text, but in a moment, Jesus appears to them, and they recognize him. They recognize him, but they recognize him when these guys show hospitality, make dinner for a stranger. I'm just challenged by that because so often in when we've got issues and challenges and things we're needing to figure out and just the normality of life, we can get focused, but sometimes the answer is when we stop and we serve another, when we show manaakitanga and we look to love another and serve another. May our lives or our issues never be so great that we don't have room for the other, not as a token thing, not as just a Christian activity, but the very answer at times to reframe our mind and get a new perspective on stuff. In the service of others, we find peace. And often then, there's this little kind of idea where someone had said, when I have a worry, I go for a walk. And in taking that worry for a walk, so often when I return, the worry has demised. In the service of others, sometimes our issues begin to dissolve, or at least we get a better perspective. So they make food. Jesus goes and breaks bread, this traveler. And in that moment, they recognize him and he's gone. Beautiful, beautiful. The next group in Luke chapter 24 is a group that disciples, and they thought he was a ghost. They're freaking out. But Jesus doesn't shame them for that. Instead, he says, come see, come touch. Ghosts don't have scars, and you can touch. And another beautiful encounter. And then we have old doubting Thomas. And Thomas is, remember that Jesus had told these women, go tell the brothers, go tell everyone that'll come and I'm going to meet them. But Thomas's response is, he gets a bit of a hard time, but he says, look, unless I see his hands, where the nails went through, came out the other side of his hands, unless I can put my hand in his side where he was pierced, I can't believe. Let's read in John 20. "8 days later, his disciples were again in the room. This time Thomas was with them. Jesus came through the locked doors, which is just cool, and he stood among them. And he says, peace be with you. Then he focused his attention on Thomas. I know this is kind of just cheesy, but what would it be like for you with all the activity in church, in your room, whatever? If Jesus just focused his attention on you, what would that feel like? What would that be like? He says, take your finger and examine my hands. Take your hand and stick it on my side. Thomas, don't be unbelieving. Believe. Look, what I love about that is Jesus doesn't condemn him, rebuke him. You silly Thomas, I can't believe, look, these other people believe, but you don't. You're terrible. You're the worst of the Christians, the believers. But no, instead he says, come, what do you need to believe? I'm here. Yes, in the next text, he says, look, it's better if you can believe without seeing, but he doesn't shame Thomas. He doesn't leave Thomas in his unbelief. He helps him believe. Isn't that beautiful? Okay. And then lastly, we'll finish with, there's the time with the guys, Nathaniel and Simon Peter, and a few of those guys are like, what do we do now? You know, they've been following as apprentices, disciples of Jesus, this rabbi, and well, let's go fishing. I guess we go back fishing. And they try and fish and nothing, and then Jesus shows up. And this is where Jesus also reinstates Peter. Remember, Peter had denied Jesus, and Jesus reinstates him and recalibrates his values. What was already in Peter bypasses the insecurity, the guilt, reinstates him. Do you love me? Feed my sheep. Do you love me? Get on with it. 3 different loves there, but anyway. The rest of them replied in John 21, we're going with you. They went out and got on the boat. They caught nothing that night. And when the sun came up, Jesus was standing on the beach. But again, they didn't recognize him. Jesus spoke to them, good morning. Did you catch anything for breakfast? They said, no. He said, well, throw your net on the other side of the boat and see what happens. They did what he said. All of a sudden, there are so many fish in it that they weren't strong enough to pull it apart, pull it in. Then the disciple Jesus loved said to Peter, it's the master. When Simon Peter realized that there was a master, he threw on some clothes, for he was stripped for work, as you do, and dove into the sea. The other disciples came in by boat, for they weren't far off land, 100 yards or so, pulling along the net full of fish. When they got out of the boat, they saw a fire on the land with fish and bread that Jesus had been cooking. What is interesting to me is that in almost every one of these appearances, excuse me, sorry, just pause there for a sec. In almost all of these appearances, at first the disciples didn't recognize Jesus. So we've been through this before and I won't, but there's historical Jesus that we can learn from, which is awesome. The archetypal human, the God-man. But historical Jesus doesn't really have the power to truly change us. The resurrected Jesus does. The Christ. The Christ that if we're not careful, we look for the Jesus we knew, not the Jesus we need to know. And so many of these, they didn't recognize him at first, but I think what it does is it gives us hope, is that in the liminal space, the time between the unknown is if we don't recognize Jesus at first, don't worry, he's there. You know, like Thomas, this idea, we in our Christian tradition, we've been taught we must have faith in Jesus. We should. We teach our kids, have faith in Jesus. You can trust him. That is a good truth. Perhaps the greater truth is that Jesus has faith in us. And he will not leave us as apprentices, as disciples, without the tools, without the opportunities to recognize him. So don't fear if you don't recognize him in a season. He's in the detail, he's there. And Jesus didn't actually leave, did you notice, any of the disciples until they recognized him. Isn't that a beautiful thing? You know, in this time of the time in between, you know, at the most unknown, there were some miraculous signs. And when I say miraculous, I hold that lightly, but where Jesus was in the detail, he appeared. And he's still trustworthy to do that with us. So I just wanted to leave you with that. This is the time we're in on the liturgical calendar and the Christian calendar. I know for myself that it's easier just to get my head down and do life and family, but we need each other. So keep connecting. We don't know what Te Awa will look like in terms of meeting. It doesn't look like we might be able to meet for a while physically. Who knows? But instead of just putting all that on pause, I know for me, we are better together. That being isolated creates its own bubble, its own echo chamber, its own ability of a new habit and cynicism and things like that. So keep leaning in. Perhaps if you feel like, well, you don't need to be shaped or you don't need kind of Christian community, well, maybe make bread for someone. What I mean by that is maybe you can be an encouragement to someone else. So keep engaging with others. Keep encouraging others. Peace be with you. We love you. We miss you. And may this next few months be marked by not knowing all the outcomes, not knowing how life will look, but that we will be leaning in to look for and to recognize where Christ is in our world. Mā te wā.